I've delivered now, so no one can. You haven't got to keep emailing me in. But Xenia, how are you doing? And I hope I haven't butchered your name there when I pronounce it.
Hi everyone, I'm doing great, and you did kind of butcher my name actually.
Yeah, okay.
Fine.
Yeah, I'll probably make a worse job of it the more I say it. It's going to drive me mad. Now, obviously, you're a YouTuber. You're quite big on the YouTube channel at the moment. I've certainly checked out your videos recently as well, and I know you cover a variety of different rest stuff and promotions and talk about a lot of different things with all your YouTube followers, which you certainly have one because, like I said at the top of the show, they've all requested to have you on here. How are you doing first and foremost through obviously the pandemic, the lockdown situation, and how has it affected your video content in any way, or is it enhanced?
Well, the lockdown has been tough, and I believe that if you just open my channel, open my page and look at it, you wouldn't be able to tell that something has changed. Mm-hmm. But from the inside, it most definitely has, because right. I can't go to live shows anymore. I really, really miss wrestling. I really miss seeing wrestling live. And of course, it's hindered my plans as to what's my next wrestling trip is going to be, because I'm based mostly in Russia and Europe right now. And I get to make 1 or 2 big wrestling trips a year. Because it's expensive, because it's difficult, because it's a long way from here and such. So right now with the lockdown, there's no way for me to plan something, for me to plan my next trip. So I'm kind of lost here a little bit, but I'm trying to make do with what I have. So
cool. And you mentioned there, for those people that don't know, that you are based in Russia, in Moscow. I suppose for us on this side of things, UK, a lot of my listeners probably wouldn't be familiar with, I don't know, Russia culturally in professional wrestling. But I know off there we spoke a little bit about your association with a particular promotion. But just in general, how is professional wrestling in Russia something that people are into? Is it a niche market? Is there a big following, or is it something that's come along recently? What is that in the Russian culture?
Well, in Russia, wrestling is a fairly young industry, and I don't know if you can even call it an industry, because there are 3 major promotions and then some smaller ones, but those are the main 3, which are based in different bigger cities in the country. IWF Russia, as I'd already mentioned, the one that I'm affiliated with, they're based in Moscow, where I am, which is the capital, of course. And it's the biggest and the oldest one in Russia. And they are 20-ish years old. So you can imagine how much longer of a way wrestling has made in the UK, or let alone in America in this time. So for the Russian audience, wrestling is still something fairly new and still something that they're unfamiliar with, and as a result kind of wary of. They don't know what to make out of it just now, because it's not a sport, but then it's not purely entertainment. And I know I'm saying the simplest, most basic things about wrestling, but for Russian wider audiences, it is new and it is unknown and undiscovered. And actually, just recently, WWE came back on Russian TV. It's not national television or anything, it's cable, but still, for the first time in this past 10-ish years, I think it's back on Russian TV. And when they just started broadcasting WWE on Russian TV years ago, it was marketed as a humorous show, as something that the commentary team, the Russian commentary team, made fun of, and they didn't take it seriously. And now it's finally been remarketed to something more serious. It's broadcast on a channel that specializes in martial arts. And also the channel that does it, it's called Match Boyets. Boyets means fighter in Russian. And they are doing a series of analytical programs about WWE, which is also really fun. And I was invited and I participated in those. They're called the Stars of Wrestling. And I'm there, I'm present there as an expert. So they're doing a really, really good job of elevating the reputation of wrestling in Russia on the whole. Because yes, IWF Russia has been also doing a great job of it. They're doing amazing, huge shows, and they're drawing audiences in, of course. But I still feel like for a country to really get on board, there needs to be something on TV. Like there needs to be international wrestling on TV. So that's in the process of being done.
That's got to be kind of challenging because, like, if it's that new, I guess you get people turn up to the wrestling shows and, I don't know, maybe they're expecting some sort of MMA boxing type exhibition in front of them. And then I don't know if Russia's like with the characters, and it can be quite elaborate at times and story driven. I guess they're sitting there like, what am I watching? What have I paid to come and see? It must be quite a kind of a sort of like education, I guess. Like the more of it that gets exposed, the more they kind of get used to it. And the only way I can say is like my experience with with people, friends around me that are not wrestling fans. It's like I have to say to them, like, do you watch a TV show? Do you watch a soap or something like that? Do you ever get faced with those like ridiculous questions of like, do you know wrestling is fake? And like, how do you handle that? Have you had that? I'm sure you have, but like, do you take that quite negatively, or do you just have like a certain answer that you'll give every time?
I feel like any other wrestling fan, we've become like desensitized to this question. Like you just get it so much, like it doesn't even anger you anymore. It's just like, yeah, I do. And as you said, the example of like watching movies or watching TV shows always comes in handy, because I've even had like my friends that I've known for years that I've tried to introduce to wrestling go like how can you watch it? Like it's not real. Then I'm like, well, you're a Game of Thrones fan, like, but I'm not telling you that. And you said about people like coming to shows and expecting something else. Like here, I don't think that's a problem actually, because I feel like if a person is at the point of buying a ticket and actually coming to a show, they know what they're paying for. But the one instance where I saw this kind of clash of an audience that's more used to like sports-based content and of wrestling was last summer actually, because IWF Russia participates on a yearly basis in this like it's a festival, I guess you could say. Like it's a festival of sports that's held in Moscow every year in June, I think, or July. And there are like different representatives of different sports federation, and they have like stands and they have like shows, like mini shows to like demonstrate and stuff. There's hockey, there's football, there's, I don't know, amateur wrestling, like everything. And they participate in that. And that's when you get to see like people who are just passing by, seeing it and like genuinely reacting to it for the first time. And the reactions are very mixed. Like I've seen people just pass by and like start yelling out like profanities and yelling at wrestlers like you're clowns, like you're pathetic and stuff like that. And it does like hurt to hear that, because they are at as much of a risk as any other martial artist would be. But then what was also like really heartwarming and really fascinating is that I could see small kids who came there for hockey or who came there for gymnastics just pass by and stop and start watching it, and their parents not being able to drag them away from it because they were just so fascinated by it. And especially for me, it's really heartwarming when I see young girls like just stop and stare and just be so enchanted by it, because I kind of see myself in them in a sense.
How did you manage to get into wrestling? At what age? And like you mentioned about TV, it being quite hard to get, and obviously you had Russian commentators that were kind of like maybe not the best at advocating what they were seeing at the time. How did you first start seeing it? Because I had a guest on recently, and he was from, I think, Portugal, and like he had so limited TV exposure to WWE. I think it was like his first memories was like 2002 at Velocity or something, which was like a kind of a WWE show at the time. It wasn't anything extravagant. But what was your first exposure to professional wrestling as a fan?
I was about 11 years old when I started watching. And the thing is, at that time, my mom, who is a designer, had work in London. And we would often go to London. And I just randomly caught WWE on the TV in our hotel room. and I got so hooked in it. And I was a kid. I didn't even know English. Like, I knew several words, but I couldn't get like a grasp of what was happening on the whole. But I was like so keen to catch it again and to watch it again. And then every time we left and came back to Russia, I would completely lose any trace of it. And then I would like reconnect with it when we went there again. So it took me a long time to start watching it regularly because I had to learn English better. I had to do my research, and I had to find ways to watch it away from an environment where it's just broadcast on TV. So for the longest time, for about 2 years, I think, I was just watching it on and off like that, just whenever I could catch it. But I remember being just so drawn to it and so fascinated by it. And it's funny how my favorite wrestler, like one of my absolute favorite wrestlers right now even, is The Miz. And it's funny how he was one of my absolute favorites from the get-go. Like, I was a child. I didn't understand what was going on. And then I went like, oh, this guy is kind of annoying. I like him. And it just stuck with me like that.
Cool, yeah. Because I mean, it's funny the first impressions that you get. I mean, certainly my earliest memories of wrestling was I think I saw the Road Warriors, Legion of Doom coming out. I don't know what Royal Rumble it was, but I was just in all of this larger than life characters in front of me going in a wrestling ring, and I think like guys like the Bushwhackers. It was a time of a lot of crazy characters. In fact, most of the characters were anything but wrestlers. Back then, a lot of people you had a surgeon, a doctor, a plumber, all these different characters behind them. But I absolutely loved it. Now, obviously, like as a fan, and your English is amazing, by the way. I have to say that, and which just goes to show how terrible I am because I can't even get your name right. But like us in England, like when we see, or the UK in general, when we used to see a lot of our guys in WWE, like the representatives as wrestling, we would always normally be like a William Regal, a kind of a snob kind of character, very upper class. And we was always the villains. It's a very kind of English thing, I think, for WWE. And I know with Japanese talent at one time, they always used to get kind of put into a certain category as well. Guys, I mean, Yokozuna wasn't even Japanese, but obviously they ran with that. This sumo wrestler, he's a bad guy. Now, when you see some of that, the Russian stuff that they've used in it, i.e., I mean, obviously we had Nikolai Volkov at the very
who wasn't
early
even
days.
Russian.
It wasn't Russian, no. Who used to sing the anthem. Who was the other guy? I think he was Ukrainian, as a matter of fact. That was Kozlov.
Yeah,
at one time. He was in there. And of course, very recently they've done that whole thing with Rusev, who's Bulgarian, but they brought him in. Even on the Titantron, they had like at the very early days, they used to show a picture of Vladimir Putin up there with the Soviet Union flag running. And now, as a fan, does that like sort of, do you sit there and think, what on earth are you doing? Or does that annoy you? Or do you see the fun side of it?
Yeah, no, it doesn't annoy me in any way, or it doesn't offend me. Like, people often ask me, like, is that like offensive? I don't think it's offensive. It's just it's kind of ridiculous to see like the stereotypical, Russian, the stereotypical Russian, the way that Americans see us, and it's like it's funny to me, and especially considering that none of those people are actually Russian, which is also fun. Like, I think there was like one Russian person ever signed by WWE. Her name was Anya. She was on NXT, but like she was on NXT for like the shortest time, and then she got released. I think out of those people, Lana is like the most Russian. And like I actually like had a chance to meet her and like to chat with her, and like Russian is actually like her first language. So at least that's legit. But when this whole Rusev thing happened, and especially his like WrestleMania entrance with the tent and the flag and all of those stuff, and it was actually shown on the news here in Russia. In the context of, like those evil Americans are trying to paint us as like barbarians and stuff. But like both extremes are funny. Like, it's funny that Americans are making us out to be like those caricatures basically of ourselves. But then it's also funny that the Russian news outlets are taking it so seriously.